Welcome to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, everybody. This is a video that I'm making on a machine that I recently procured, and what you are looking at is the side of that Janome Free Arm. That's the machine I refer to as one of the hybrid vintage machines, meaning it has a lot of great quality parts and it's also got a few plastic parts. And again, this machine was introduced somewhere around the late 1970s, early 80s, and it is basically, it reflects a long, slow slide as manufacturers continue to lower the durability of their machines over time. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take off the access panel and I'm going to remove, or attempt to remove, the motor, because I want to see how this motor is attached. Like most motors, it is mounted on the back of the machine. Some machines from this period, such as the Kenmores, have it further down, sort of in the base of the machine. But this one is, it's mounted on the back, and of course it has a cover. In the 60s, really late 60s, you start to see companies put covers on their motors, so you can't see much of the motor or the belt. And that's pretty much standard in sewing machines today. So they've been doing that quite a while. And so I've got just two screws that hold on this cover. Now this cover is plastic, and you want to be careful. Notice it. You want to be. It's made of plastic. It's, what is it, 45-year-old plastic. So you want to be gentle with it, right? And when you go to take it off, study it. Pay attention to see if it has clearance. If it doesn't, you may have to come up with a way to wiggle it off, but do it very slowly because it doesn't take much to crack these. Normally, I don't mind if a machine has something like this made of plastic. I would prefer it to be metal. But this piece, and of course it has a grill to allow air to cool the motor. This piece is not really under stress, and so when they started to reduce costs by replacing metal with plastic, you can still have an heirloom quality machine that has something like this, because this again is not part of the drivetrain. It's not really under stress when the machine is in operation. So I'll set this aside for a moment. Now you can, this is not unlike the Kenmore. When I took the side panel off the Free Arm Kenmore, those of you may remember if you saw that video. And of course I'm using my trusty screwdriver tip set that I've shown all of you and how much I really like that. And it looks like I'm going to get the widest tip, because this bolt, again, this principle of having a bolt and a bracket, then it has travel space so you can adjust it for your belt. This is typical. Again, this idea goes all the way back to the first electric machine. So this part of what you're seeing is not really new. And I'm going to loosen this bolt, and apparently I may need my ratchet. That bolt's been there a while. We'll see how easily it comes off, and if it fights me, I may want to put some WD-40 in there to loosen it. We'll see. I don't want to strip it. Boy, it's not budging, guys. Okay, we're going to need to put a little something in there because I don't want to damage that bolt. Even though it's going into metal, there's no point in being extra rough with it. It may have been sitting, for all I know, it may have the original belt. I can't be sure, but this bolt has been there a while, I can tell. Okay, so I got my can of WD-40. Again, just as a reminder, this is not a lubricant. You don't use this in place of oil. It's traditionally been used, and there are other products similar to this that you can use. This product was developed, I don't know the whole history of it, but essentially I use it to unstick things. And there are others out there. Liquid wrench is another one. It has a stronger smell. And what we want to do is let this sit for a bit. Let it have time to loosen it up. Maybe, it's going to penetrate. I think it's called a penetrating. Stops squeaks, cleans and protects, loosens rusted parts, frees sticky mechanisms. Okay, that's why I'm using it. And who knows what else it does. But it is not oil, and so just remember that. You don't ever want to use this in place of sewing machine oil. That's That's a different material. There we go. It may have been ready to loosen anyway, but again, always, as I mentioned before, patience will carry you a long way in this hobby. You really want to use patience. Now, you can see I've loosened the bolt and the bracket's ready to move. This is something you would do, by the way, if you were going to take the belt off. I am going to take it off because I got to get the motor out. And there comes the belt. And let's just take the belt off. I don't really want to get any this substance, this liquid on that belt. Now I'm going to take the bolt out. And when I put it back in, you guys will remember I like to put a drop of oil, sewing machine oil. You know, I'll put some on the threads. It'll make it easier if we have to remove it in the future, or if someone does. Now let's see. We're going to see what happens when we pull this out. Now you will see that there is a cord here, and it goes down into the machine, and I suspect this you can see two cords that come in. Remember that the machine is getting electricity for two things essentially. The motor, which drives the mechanicals, and then there's a separate cord here, or a branch, that is used to, it's for the light bulb, I believe. Now, I'm going to show you guys, this is part of the motor series, and there's a reason for this. If you recall, I mentioned to you all that there are ways to clean a motor without taking it apart. And there can be reasons that you will want to do that. This motor has, you see the little, let's zoom in here for you guys. And we'll angle it down. Ooh, there we go. Okay, now take a look at this. This is, and it has a little place for a screwdriver, a straight edge screwdriver tip. This is the cap for the motor brush. And of course there's going to be one underneath it also. There it is, right there. Now it's kind of a funny thing about sewing machine motors. At some point, and they started doing this in the 60s, some of the manufacturers would make these motors and you would be able to get a relatively simple access to the motor brushes. Similar to the way I did this on that rotary motor that I did the video on that you all saw. When you're cleaning brushes, of course, behind this cap is a spring, and behind that is the brush. And the spring keeps pressure so that the brush pushes against the part of the motor that it needs to come in contact with. And just as I did with the rotary motor, I'm going to loosen this, and when I do, I want to hold that cap, because otherwise it's going to go, it's going to spring out and go flying, and I really don't want that. I don't want to have to go chasing around looking for it. Not so much worried about the brush, although if the brush and the spring are attached to this, the whole thing could go flying out. Now, with the other motor, I had the luxury of, I could just simply, I had access to it. The motor was hanging outside. This motor is under a cover, and apparently they've installed this plastic cover. Let's zoom back out for you. They have installed the back, not the side panel you saw me take off, but the back of this thing is mounted to the body with, I don't even know how they've mounted this. I haven't gone in to look. And whatever it is, they decided to make it really difficult to take off. And I don't have to, but I'm going to have to set this motor up so you guys can see me get to the brushes, because right now I'm holding it. It's just dangling by its cord. So give me a sec. I'm going to set this up where I can actually rest the motor, and then we'll take a look at the brushes. Okay, I've got my screwdriver tip set here, and I'm looking for one. I want something that's close, that will fill that screwdriver slot as much as possible, because I'll get less chance of causing the little cap harm. And it's not stuck. It seems to want to loosen for me pretty well. In fact, I may be able to do it with, now the motor wants to wiggle. Okay, hopefully you guys will see what I'm doing here. But remember what I said with the last motor, I want to keep it, I've got to keep some pressure here as I raise this, because if I don't, that spring's going to want to send it out. because as soon as the threads on this cap come up, ooh, there it is, it wants to come out. So, didn't take a lot of screwdriver effort there. Now, I've got my thumb and finger here, trying to hold the motor up for you guys. There we go. Got the cap off. That's what it looks like underneath, because as you can see, the spring is going to have a little place to rest there when we put it back. Now, I'm resting this on a little box because I wanted to be able to show this to you, see if it'll stay put. Now, let's take a look at the motor brush and see what we have. Okay, not terrible. This is, I want to say this is probably a little, let's get this in front of you where you can see it. There's the brush. It's wiggling on the spring. Sorry, it looks like I'm let's hold it still so you can see it. There we go. Okay, I have got here 1, 2, maybe 3/8, a little more than that. Now, these brushes, these are probably the original brushes. These brushes will last a lot longer. In fact, I think the brush replacement would probably be maybe 1/4 of an inch at the most in length. So, judging from what I see here, we've probably got several years more worth of brush wear available to us. And this is one of those close calls. Do you replace the brush or not? If I were down to 1/4 of an inch, I would definitely replace them. They'll still run. It just depends on how many hours. But right now I've got more, just a tad more than 3/8. So I'm going to keep these brushes. Now, just as I have mentioned to you guys, hopefully you can see this in the light. Do you see the curvature on the brush? It's a slight arc. And let's see if that will show up for you guys in the light. But anyway, it has like a little dip, and that's because it's been pushing on the commutator of the motor, and the commutator is round. Now, as I mentioned to you guys with the when I was talking, let's get a little zoom in here for you. When I was mentioning to you all, I was talking about on the Rotary motor series, when I was talking about those brushes, the same principle applies when you go to put a brush back in, and we'll do that in just a second. You want to line up the curve with the curve of the motor, and of course the commutator is, think of it like a big copper wheel, and it's going in this direction. So the curve will need to curve, the curve arch will be facing us. You won't see it in profile. It won't be running like this. It'll be running towards you, so you won't actually see the curve when you put the brush back in. Okay, let's take a look, and we're going to take out our trusty Q-tips. I need to start getting my Q-tips at a place, one of those big warehouse places, because I go through them like crazy, as you guys can tell by now. It's a great tool. These are the pointed, tapered cotton swabs. I said Q-tips, that's just a brand. I really like these. They're denser, and they're very useful for getting in little narrow spaces. But if you don't have them, use the ones you have. That's okay. Now, the brush space in this motor is a little narrower, and that's why I really wanted to get this particular tapered cotton swab. I better zoom back out. All you guys can see. Let's see. There we go. Now, I'm going to, again, like I did with the rotary motor, notice I'm going to put my, I don't think you can see that. I'm going to put my finger at the top of the swab, and I'm just going to hold down, but not, don't smash it. You don't need a lot. And then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to turn the pulley to get the commutator to turn. Let's turn it a little bit more. Kind of an odd thing, you got the motor in one hand, and okay. Now you can see that I pulled up. There's some carbon buildup on the commutator, and that's normal, right? Any machine that's been used will have this. Some of this is carbon from heat. Some of this is residue from the brush. I'm going to take my the other end, the clean end of the cotton swab, and I'm going to put it down in there, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Again, turning the pulley so we can get the commutator to move around. And again, this is where the brush would be pushing against if the machine were installed and ready to go. I've turned it, and let's see what we get. And there's some more. Some of this on the side is actually coming off the sides of the housing for the brush, and some of it, particularly at the very end of the tip, is it is there because we're actually getting dust off the commutator. Now, I took the tapered cotton swab. Remember, if your cotton swab is too wide, don't force it, because you could end up shredding the cotton and getting it down in there, and that's not going to be fun or helpful. So, but this one I've got just right sized. I'm going to do it again. I took another swab out, a clean one. Turning the commutator now. And I'm still getting some on the tip there. It looks like the housing's nice and clean. I can actually see down. I don't know if this will pick up, guys. Let me do a super zoom. I don't know if that's going to show up for you. And let's see. Whoa. Let's see if I can get this to show. I don't know if you'll be able to pick this up. But down in there, in that cavity, I can see copper. That's the commutator. I see it reflected. I don't think it's going to show up here. And this is a very reflective motor housing. If I shine a flashlight on here, all you're going to see is this reflecting back. So again, this is a very faint light, and I don't know if my cam's going to pick it up for you. I won't know until I play this, but anyway, you get the idea. You can sometimes you can see down in there. I don't see a lot of patina, tarnish, or buildup, which tells me this machine was used some, but not a lot like some of the vintage models. So I'm going to take, I've got another clean end here. Better zoom back out. Okay, I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it down into the housing of the brush. Again, I'm going to push, not hard, just basically holding the swab in place, turning the pulley. And now I'm just barely getting anything. I can tell that this motor had very little hours, because sometimes the buildup on the commutator can be significant. The motors still provide plenty of power, but this is a way to clean it. Now, you might think to yourself, why not take these nuts and these long bolts out and take the motor apart? Because you'll see the tag, the motor's label, is actually a little plate, and it is riveted into the housing, but it's on one side. These motor housings are like little clamshells, and they open up. But because I can tell that there's very little wear on this commutator based on what's coming off of there, I'm going to show you how to lubricate the bearings, and you don't have to take the motor apart. It's not always necessary to disassemble every single part on a machine if the motor is behaving properly. Now, I haven't plugged this in and run it, but I want to go ahead and clean it regardless. Now, remember the brush we had. Okay, the way I'm holding this brush right now, this may not show up, but I can see that put it in the light here, the curvature is currently facing you guys as if this were like a little, you could put this on the bottom of a bowl, okay? So now I need to turn it sideways, because that's the direction of the arch of the commutator. And I'm going to put, well, that's contorted, isn't it? Let's do it on this side. Okay, right now I have, I don't know if you can see that, but I have the arch in that brush. It's not a dramatic arch, but there's a slight curve there, okay, at the very bottom of the brush. I'm going to turn that sideways because the curve of the commutator is in alignment with the view we have from the camera. Now, I'm going to take the brush cap, I'm going to line it up with the spring, and this is the fun, tricky part. I'm going to push down, and I'm going to start getting this little cap threaded. Okay, now these are plastic threads, so you want to go easy. Make sure you can feel it. I can tell, unless it pops out at us, I can tell that it's seating. And then I'll take my little screwdriver tip. I don't even need the handle, and I'll just turn. And if it's not setting in the threads right, I will know. But there it is. There are many threads on these. You don't have to go far. In fact, I didn't have to turn it but so many times. And now the cap is in. The brush is pushing against the commutator. Now, we'll go ahead and check the other brush. Most of the time, very often, When brushes are replaced, they're replaced at the same time, but you never know, so why not? Let's take this one out. And I've already cleaned the commutator. Now let's make sure, okay, I've got my hand on the cap so it doesn't go flying. There's the spring on the motor brush. And sure enough, this brush is the same length as the other one was. Now I can take a cotton swab to clean out the little I can take a cotton swab to clean out the housing for the brush. The commutator is clean. I'm not really going to get any more cleaning of the commutator, but I'll put this down in there, and I pulled out some of the dust. There's nothing wrong with that. Keep it from getting down on the commutator maybe. This is probably going above and beyond what's needed, but there you have it. It's clean. And we know that both brushes are the same length, thereabouts. Here again is the curve of the brush. It's very subtle. Putting in the light, so maybe that'll show up for you guys. Maybe you can see if you can zoom in. Now, there's the curve, but I'm going to turn sideways because remember the arch of the commutator is in alignment with the view that we have here. Okay, and the brush just sort of sits there waiting for you. I typically do not need oil on these plastic caps. I don't find that they bind up very much. And again, you've got the little brass space on the bottom there. Make sure that lines up with your spring. And then you push down and start turning. See if you can get it to start threading. And you'll know if you don't have it threaded because it'll bounce back out at you. So kind of approach it. There we go. You'll kind of have to kind of go by feel. Get my screwdriver tip and turn. It only took like 3/4 of a turn, and there you are. Now, the next thing to show you guys is, I mentioned to you, lubricating bearings. Now, remember, if you remember the rotary motor video, I actually applied grease to those bearings because those motors required grease. That's how they use. That's how the bearings were lubricated. Over time, sewing machine motor design changed, and even the Singer, not only the white brand rotary, but the Singer sewing machines, the early ones used grease for their bearings. But over time, that would change, and eventually they would move to using an oil. You would use oil to lubricate the bearings of the motor. Now, this is one of the most important things to note here. I'm going to get my oil bottle and I'll show you how this is done. It's very important that you only put, and a lot of times your manual, if you have a manual, by the time this machine was made, only the dealer was expected to do this, but I'll show you on one of the older white models I have, because that is going to be another motor series video, and you'll understand when I do it why I'm doing another one with a motor that kind of looks like this, but it's not the same. So I'll get my oiler and I'm going to show you there's only one place that you put oil, just as with the grease, just as with the motors that take grease on the bearings. It's very important to only put that lubricant in the space it was designed. If you put it anywhere else on this motor, you will damage and potentially destroy the motor. So it's really, this is one of those details that you can't fudge. You got to get it just right. It's not hard, but you want to pay extra attention to this. Okay, everyone, I went and got my oiler. Now, remember when I was talking to you about the rotary motor, you typically have bearings in a sewing motor on both ends because there's a drive shaft that runs the length of the motor. There's one end of the pulley, and then it has to connect or anchor to the other end of the motor. And that drive shaft goes all the way, like I say, all the way across the length of the motor. On each end is a bearing or a place where that drive shaft has to spin, and it needs lubrication. Otherwise, the motor would wear out very prematurely. Now let's start on the other side. It's a little less, well, slightly less confusing to see. When the motor is upright, okay, This motor came out, right? Remember, it was originally like, I got to zoom out or you guys won't see this. Okay, the motor was originally like this, okay? And you see the label is up, so we know that's, the motor is right side up, okay? Now, we'll start on this side, the back side, but it's still right side up. Now, I want you to look. You're going to see lots of vent holes. These large areas are for venting air and cooling the motor. These two places here, you don't put oil here. These areas are here. They're part of the construction of the motor, the specifics of which there's a part of the internals of the motor that is attached here. In fact, I believe that's where the actual motor itself attaches to the shell housing. But the place you want to apply lubrication is sitting right here. If your motor has these, and not all do, some of them eventually the motors went, excuse me, they went to a non-serviceable bearing, and they had what they called lifetime bearings. Of course, we know that eventually they go bad. But these, fortunately, were designed to be lubricated. Now, when the motor is right side up, as this one is, change the angle of this just a bit for you guys. Now, look at the center of the side of the motor shell, and it's kind of extending out because the drive shaft is anchored in here. There is a small hole directly above, and some of you who have these, your manual, if you don't have one of these covered and sealed up motors, your manual may actually tell you to do this. They eventually quit doing that. But I'm going to take 1 drop of oil and I'm going to put it right there in that hole, okay? And that's it. Remember, there is no oil reservoir here for your motor to hold a bunch of oil. You have to put 1 drop here. If you put too much, it's going to spill in the motor and it's going to probably damage and or ruin your motor, and that would really be unfortunate. Now, I'm going to turn the motor around. This is the side you saw when I first disassembled it. Notice it has the same thing on the other side. Now, this hole that I'm referring to where the oil for the bearings goes is only on the top, okay? It's not down here. And in fact, the other side is just the same. You have, this is the one we just, that I put the drop of oil in, but notice there's not one underneath because the oil is going to need gravity to pull it down into the bearing, okay? So if you're wondering, hey, where is it up? Is it to the side? No, if you're going to have one of these oil spots to apply lubricant for your bearings, okay, and again, this is sewing machine oil. Don't put anything else in. It only uses, if you're going to oil a bearing in a sewing machine motor and not grease it, because these don't take grease, it's sewing machine oil, okay? So I'm going to take 1 drop. I'm going to put it in that little spot there, okay? There might be a little excess on the outside you can wipe off. Now what do I do? Now that I've gotten a drop of oil in that spot, I'm going to turn my pulley. Yeah, actually, you probably don't really have to do this, guys, because once you start running the motor, it's going to take care of this itself. And that's going to help pull down that, mostly gravity's doing this, it's going to pull the oil down onto the bearing, and that's it, okay? That's all there is to it. Now, oiling this bearing is not the same as when you're oiling your machine. So you don't need to have this done every time you start a sewing project. It's not like that, fortunately. Because once the oil gets down in the bearing, it's not gonna, it shouldn't be going anywhere else. It's not like it's gonna splash out or cause issues, as long as you don't put too much. Remember, 1 drop. People are always tempted to do more. Oh, maybe more is better. No, more is not better here. Okay, there is a certain amount that it wants, and any of you who have manuals that talk about this, it will tell you in no uncertain terms, 1 and only 1 drop. Do not use more, and they mean it. So anyway, again, I'm showing you this for a reason. This motor was built as was the machine in the late 70s. It has access to the brush, and it has a spot to put oil, 1 drop for the bearing. And remember this, because the next motor series video I do, you're going to see that the motor doesn't have this, okay? And we're going to talk about what you should do or not do when you have a motor where you can't get to the brushes easily. But anyway, thank you for watching, guys. You have now seen the hidden motor of this Janome from the 70s. And as you can see, they worked really hard to make it more ornery to get to. I was able to get to this, but by the 70s, they basically were telling people, hey, when your machine needs service, bring it into the dealer and we'll take care of it. This plastic housing, let's pan out just a little bit more, you can see. This plastic housing, I took off the side panel you saw, but look at this. This thing is mounted underneath the machine, and under here, I actually got under here and looked. There are 2 screws, but you can't get to them with a screwdriver because this thing is arched. You can tell they're trying really hard to not make this user-friendly for the owner to service. And of course, today's machines, you know, they don't even have access of any kind. You just use them and they conk out and people throw them in the trash, which is part of the problem with new machines. And that's why those of us who love these old machines appreciate them, not only because they're strong, but because they're durable. Even a hybrid vintage machine like this one, which is not heirloom quality, and yet it still has a lot better construction than some of the new junk that's available for sale right now, new. Anyway, this is another Motor Series video for you guys. Again, some motors take grease like the Rotary motor does that you saw in that earlier video. This motor takes 1 drop of sewing oil in a specific hole. And just to reiterate for you, you have to be very sure that you are in the right spot, okay? So it's none of these vent holes. It's not this area here where the motor is attaching to the housing. There is a very small hole about this, what is it the size of? Not really sure what to compare it to. Maybe a little bit bigger than the head of a pin. And it is going to be directly above the center of this little bulging area on both sides. And that's where your drive shaft is resting, and that's where it needs to be lubricated. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. You may have looked at these motors and just seen a bunch of holes and grills and not known what was what. Many of you, if you have machines newer than this, you don't even have this. They quit even allowing the lubrication of bearings. They would just build the motors and let them run until they quit. A lot of the new replacement motors are that way. But at least if you have one of these, you have an idea of how it can be easily, you can clean the commutator without taking the motor apart. And I showed you the same thing on the Rotary series. And then, of course, we were able to lube the motor bearing without taking it apart. In the next video, you'll see one of the things they were doing to motors that makes this a little more challenging. Thanks for watching, everyone, and stay tuned for the next video. We'll see you then.